Hey guys, I'm sitting here in my podcast studio and it's kind of weird being able to deliver a YouTube episode in my studio. Normally, I'm out in the bush educating people on what we're actually doing out there when we're hunting or in a hunting scenario. So, this is kind of weird, but it's all for a good reason. And this week, we're talking about photography. For decades, professional hunters have represented animals on social media platforms across the world. However, whether they've depicted that animal as best as they possibly can often doesn't really happen. And the photography side of thing, the post hunt, is often one that gets really overlooked. And there's a couple of reasons for that, but one of the more popular reasons for that is time consuming. However, I'm no professional photographer, but over the years of photographing hundreds of animals, there are a couple things that I've learned and I've taken into consideration when I've set up animals for photography purposes. Now, this is no means the correct way of doing things. However, I do think there are a couple of steps in this episode that you would want to use on your next safari. And when we talk photography, it's important to highlight that for generations, us as hunters, we want to capture the moment as best as we possibly can. All the hard work that we have put in into hunting a specific animal or species out there, and we want to capture that. We want to savor that moment after the shot has happened. However, we sit on a very delicate balance. And in episode of 51 on the podcast, I had a very interesting conversation with Carl Vansel from Jodic Safaris and how he perceived the photography fraternity.
The biggest disappointment I find in our industry with young fish hunters is poor pictures, poor presentation, poor pictures. I'm going to give you a little secret. So many people ask me, why are our pictures that good? Could we work so much bloody harder at them? Mm-hmm. Do you know that every one of my PHs beginning of the season, you know what they get from me? They get a chamois. They get 2 chamois. One for their window, because no client wants to see a bug on a windscreen. I want to see a clean window. Then a chamois. Everybody gets a chamois from me, sometimes twice a year. That's a nicer way of me saying the photos can improve. Yeah. It's not how wet the animal is by your bottle of water your tracker has to clean that animal. It's how well you dry your animal. My tracker, I have 3 chamois. I have 2 different brushes. What effort are you putting into that lasting memory? Because the most important factor, at the end of the day, when all is said and done, that hunter goes home. What represents the success of his safari? And remember, even if it wasn't a success, in his opinion, he's never going to admit it's not. He's going to be proud about it. How are you represented in that moment? Number one. Number 2, if you look at that picture, is that something you're going to share on social media or where there is possibly a sensitive crowd? Because we're only catering to the middle ground here. The guy who's a hunter, he's in no matter what, blood, guts, or clean photo, he's happy, he's in. I'm not trying to get him in, he's already in. I'm only trying to get the middle ground. The guy who's anti is never coming. The anti, he's out, forget about it, give it up. But the middle ground is large. How much of the middle ground do we influence? If we don't influence it positively, I can tell you right now, children won't be doing what we're doing here today. And then I don't know what the hell I'm going to do here because I don't want a goat farm or sheep farm or cattle farm. So I got to figure this out. So I got to do my bit to be able to continue on my journey and to be able to afford my children the same opportunity.
He kind of said that we're on a balance. We're on a delicate balance between what is right and what is wrong. There's no in between. We're trying to convert the guys that are kind of sitting on the fence about the hunting industry, and the guys that are already in the hunting industry, they're not quite concerned what gets posted out there on any one of our social media platforms. And I thought this was an incredible approach on how we took it and preparing the animals, taking the correct photos, focusing on unique features that that animal bestows is probably one of the more important aspects after the shot on any safari. So, this week, I've broken it down into a couple of steps that we need to take in considering our photography game. But first, before we get to the steps, we've got to understand there's three key reasons why photography is so important after the animal has been hunted. Number one, it's marketing. You're marketing yourself, you're marketing the game farm you're hunting on, and you're marketing the hunter if that is what he wishes. It can be a little bit dodgy when the hunter doesn't want to be a part of the marketing side of things and doesn't want his face splurged all over Facebook. There is ways and means around that. However, in this situation, we're going to have the best possible scenario. A hunter is enthusiastic about showing off his trophy or his animal that he hunted, and he wants to put it out on social media platforms. The next important factor is taxidermy. It's important to understand that once you've highlighted specific features on any one of the animals, or just for reference sake, that a taxidermy can go back to that animal and have a picture as a reference to see, oh, maybe there is a little bit more white in the face that we can feature a little bit more on the animal. How should it be turning? How did the ears look? And specific unique details that a taxidermist can use when mounting your specific animal. And then last but not least, probably one of the most important aspects of it all. By the time the hunter arrives on South African soil, to the time that he leaves, the only memories he will leave with are those that have happened in the safari. And once he gets back to wherever he came from, the only thing he's going to be able to show as proof or as his enjoyment is his photos. Before we get into it, guys, once again, I want to mention that I am no professional photographer at all. However, I have invested a lot of time in my photographic equipment and in my photographic knowledge. And I've been one of those guys that have YouTubed incredible opportunities to try and take photos in different lighting, different positioning, and most importantly, playing around with a couple of different settings on your camera. However, we're not going to get that advanced in this episode. We're just going to try and keep it simple. So, with that being said, when it comes to equipment, you don't need cameras, you don't need lenses that are going to cost you thousands and thousands and thousands of rands to get the job done. Oh no. All you need is something we carry around on our everyday excursion, and that is a cell phone. Number two, once the animal is hunted and it's laying before you, it's important to highlight features. In that moment of rejoice and approaching the animal and confining in it and picking it up, admiring what you guys have just shot, take a note and take in the possibilities of the really cool features that this animal may hold. Sometimes on a kudu, those ivory tips are something very, very unique. On a blue wildebeest, the cracked up bosses. On a buffalo, the worn down horns, and it's just sitting as a scrum cap. Because later on, you're going to want to capture those features as best as you possibly can. So highlight them early, keep them fresh in your memory bank, and take it forward in the next couple of steps. Number three, highlighting a good spot. So you've just hunted an animal, it may be in a very peculiar position. Sometimes it is really cool at that particular moment is to lift the head up and snap a couple of photos there and then where it lay. More often than not, they do turn out pretty cool. Or when you see a client lifting the head to admire it, capture those moments because those ones are going to be forever important later on in this journey. But once the animal is done and everything starts and the adrenaline subsides and it's just you guys are purely standing there over and looking at pure beauty, identify a spot that's going to represent that animal as best as possible. You guys need to remember one thing when it comes to photography is that not only are we acting on three steps or the three main points that I mentioned earlier on in this episode, but we also add in respect to the animal, respect and dignity, keep in consideration fence lines, power lines, all those sort of things that can obstruct the animal from behind. So you want to get away from that as much as possible and keep into consideration good skyline and lighting. But we'll get into that a little bit later. Step number 4 is preparation. And this is one where a lot of people, and this is why it gets disheartening photo prep, is it takes a lot of time to prepare the animal as correct as you possibly can. Take into consideration any obstacles where the animal is lying that could be obstructing it in its face, on its horns, along the body, or even getting rid of the blood spots around the mouth, wherever the shot placement was. And it's not good enough that you just wash the blood off and there the animal sits with a wet patch. Make sure it dries correctly, and you take just that little bit more time to prep the animal as best as you possibly can. Positioning the animal. Firstly, there's a rule of thumb when it comes to photography. Now, of course, we want to depict the animal as best as we possibly can, and we've seen a couple of poses. We can have the pose that's square, straight on the client's or the hunter sits directly behind the animal, the head turned in at a 90-degree facing the camera, and that's how the animal is depicted. However, it becomes a little bit square, and you want to create a little bit of dimension to specific species. I can't touch on all the species at the moment because this episode would take on forever. However, I can mention on a couple of species, it's important to understand that we're dealing with depth of horns and body posture. You know, for instance, on a blue wildebeest that I had a couple of months ago, where the photo was completely square on, I didn't really enjoy it because it didn't highlight the sheer mass of that animal. It was a very shallow photo, a very square photo. It almost kind of depicted it in 2D. However, the clarity of the photo was incredible, and it was an incredible photo captured. It just didn't quite sit well with me that there was no depth to that specific photo. So, one of the tips that I could suggest you guys is head along to your phone and in settings, turn on the grid setting on your phone. And your phone screen will be divided by in 3 sections, with each having a little block. Now you want to add depth. Now, what I've always been taught is that you want to create a little bit of a dimensional depth, so at a diagonal angle. So positioning the animal at a diagonal angle allows you not only to give you depth of the animal, but in some scenarios you can actually depict the depth of the horns of that specific animal. For this instance, we're using an impala. Now, impala has been my Achilles heel. I have yet to take a photo of an impala that has satisfied me beyond belief. Normally, we're dealing with a couple of scenarios, whether you want to get the length of the impala horn or the depth of the bell. However, having it at this diagonal angle represents the impala in a very unique and special way. And I've always enjoyed this shot because it kind of gives it a little bit of depth, and you can see the depth in the bell. So next up is lighting. Making sure that when you position the animal, that you want to get as best possible lighting as you possibly can. And what do I mean by this? Depending on the time of day that you have hunted this specific animal, will also depend where the sun is sitting. Now, sometimes if the sun is sitting in a harsh position that can be directly placed along the client's eyes, the clients will often squint into the camera, not giving it the best facial features that you are looking for. So you want to get the sun a little bit out, but also making sure that the animal is not completely casting a shadow into a dark area of its body, taking away some of those beautiful features that it bestows. Sometimes it's always best to find equal lighting. And what do I mean by this is normally the time of day, so normally dusk or dawn. It's a beautiful time of day where there's not a lot of shadow, but it is just that perfect lighting where you can get an equal amount of light on that target and you can take those crisp and clear photos. if it's not that time of day and there is a lot of harsh sunlight, sometimes it's always cool to try and find a beautiful shady spot where it's going to cast a big shadow that covers the hunter and the animal, that way not having any sort of obstructions over the face or any one of the features that the animal holds. So take that into consideration. Once step 1 to 5 has been followed correctly and you're happy with how the animal is positioning, it's time to capture that moment. Well, this is always the important part, right? Because not only is the animal the main focal point, but so too is the hunter. He wants to show off that he was the one that put in the hard yards to be able to get this beautiful animal. So you want to depict him as best as you possibly can. Bear in mind, sometimes, more often than not, hunters come out with their favorite weapon, whether it be a bow, spear, or even a rifle. Clients always want to show it off. In my scenario, I'm not a big fan of having weapons in the photo. Always represent the weapon in a very respectable manner. Always take into consideration when you're dealing with rifles, all the safety aspects of things, but also depict the features of a bow, because a bow is a very unique weapon, and how you photograph those particular accessories. But bearing in mind, capturing the moment is the most important part. So once you've captured that moment with the hunter, and if all his favorite weapon, make sure that you rejoice a little bit and add in his wife if she's there with him, his best friend, the trackers, and just make sure that you capture every moment possible, because those memories will last a lifetime. Now, in a lot of my social media posts, step number 8 brings me to editing. And I'm not going to dwindle a lot on this because it's not the most important aspect of photography. However, it could be utilized in a very unique and special way. Editing, adding logos, or adjusting the contrast, the vibrance, the saturation, whatever it may be, your personal preference is exactly that. It's your personal preference. So, what might work for me or what might look attractive to me is not always going to look attractive to the man next to you. So, always take that into consideration. However, like I mentioned before, it can be utilized as a marketing tool. So if you feel you've done the correct way and followed each step accordingly, and that that animal depicts your business, your professional hunting skills as best as it possibly can, well, then adding a logo is not the worst thing you can do. I'm a big fan for adding logos because brand awareness for professional hunters out there is probably one of the more important aspects when you want to promote yourself anywhere in any market. So take that into consideration. However, you do want to make sure that there are a couple saved copies without that logo for your hunter. And then, of course, sharing the moment. Remember, it's important to always share your success. Whether you've taken the photo on your client's phone or the hunter's phone, and you want to share that with your friends and family, because that you need to be proud of. Be proud of what you've done. Be proud of what you've accomplished. Share it on WhatsApp groups, across social media platforms, because the more you do so, the more you learn. If there is anyone out there that wants to add a little bit of critic to your photo, take it as critique advice. Don't take it too personally, and just see that it's a fellow hunter out there looking out for you and wanting you to do the best you possibly can. So, guys, with that being said, it's important to look at photography not from a time wasting point of view, but more from an opportunity point of view. Take the time, put in the effort on taking photos. If it does take you an hour longer, it's not the worst thing out there. I promise you now, you're going to reap the rewards a little bit later. So, make sure you put in a little bit more effort and you take into consideration that those hunters are leaving with those special, special memories. There's nothing worse than scrolling through Instagram and seeing mediocre photos taken when you know they can do just a little bit better. Putting in the effort always helps. So, with that being said, my name is Dylan Love from the PH Journals. If you are, happy hunting. Until then, stay safe, stay blessed, and stay humble. We'll catch up.
Stay at home.